Please put your, awesome, glad we're recording. Well, good morning. Please put your name and your in the chat and where you're calling in from into the chat box. My name's Nadine. I'm calling in today from Pennsylvania on the unceded homelands of the Lenni Lenape people. And I am one of your 3 moderators today, alongside Dan and Hannah and our wonderful rapporteurs, Joshua and Jessica. Currently, I serve as the 2nd Vice President of the Global NGO Executive Committee and am thrilled to be here today in conversation with you, our NGO community. Spaces like these where we gather and get to co-create our visions for a regenerative, just and compassionate future are of critical importance. The UN and civil society have always been deeply aligned in their visions and hopes for humanity. And it's dynamic conversations with you, members of civil society, that allows this partnership to deepen. And after all, the UN stool does stand on 3 legs: the member states, UN staff, and civil society. And balance requires responsibility and accountability on all parts. So it's up to us all to re-envision and reinforce what that looks like in the context of the post-2020 era. So without further ado, some housekeeping items before we dive into our session today. Please do your best to remain on mute unless you're called on to share. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and please, in order to allow as many civil society members to share as possible, because we want to hear from all of you, keep your interventions to around a minute long if you can. And if there's anything that you'd like to continue adding throughout the session, put that in the chat and we will make sure that that gets documented. So Dan and Hannah, you have the floor.
So I believe it is to me next, unless Hannah, if you want to introduce yourself first, and then however you'd like me to do this.
Sorry, I just joined, so I'm not sure if both you, Dan, and Nadine, and the rapporteurs have introduced themselves.
I have not, but you go ahead.
Okay, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I am the Executive Director of IYLO, which stands for the International Young Leaders Organization. And IYLO essentially works to establish we're advocating for the establishment of the UN Youth Office and further youth architecture within the UN system. Alongside that, I'm also Vice Chair of UNA Scotland, and I'm involved in the Conference Committee of UNA UK, UNA standing for the United Nations Association, which is under WFUNA, the World Federation of United Nations Associations. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I can go ahead. I am Dan Perel. I serve as a representative for the Baha'i International Community's United Nations Office. And I have been doing this for a little over a decade. It has been a joy and a pleasure always to be working with the good folks at the DGC. I also serve as co-chair of the steering committee of the Coalition for the UN We Need. There's going to be a quiz later, so write all of that down. And that coalition essentially is sort of running alongside the member state and UN processes dealing with the 75th anniversary of the UN and all the follow-on effects, which is why I believe I'm in this room, because our common agenda is one of those subsequent items. But before jumping into our common agenda, I don't know if the rapporteurs want to introduce themselves so that you know who to commend for their wonderful note-taking.
Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Alade. Originally from Nigeria, but currently living in the UK. I work with Nigerian Youth SDGs Network, and I'm also a member of the Youth Steering Committee for DGC. Happy to be here. Jessica.
Great, thank you, Joshua. My name is Jessica Lee from California, the US, and I actually involved in a lot of community service at the local, regional, national, and international levels. So currently, I am in contact with the Department of Education in the US to launch webinars on climate education and climate literacy. I also hold those workshops at the international level. And locally, I also involved in community service, for example, climate action, and I'm leading a team of the young adults. So great to be here working on all the different aspects and then also to talk about the common agenda. Thank you.
Great. So I think I've been asked to talk a little bit about what our common agenda is. And forgive me for those who are greater experts in this than I am, but I'll just give a quick 5-minute overview perhaps of what this document is. So You may be aware that last year was the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And in advance of that, the member states had a whole wonderful consultation process where they came up with this member state political declaration on the 75th anniversary, 12 lines of action, beautiful rhetoric, all this great stuff. At the end, there's one little line that says, ask the Secretary General to prepare a report by the 76th session of the General Assembly on the future of the United Nations. And 1 year passes, again, broad consultations, definitionally, we can talk about how broad it was, but broad consultations. And he prepares this report called Our Common Agenda, which is 100 and some odd paragraphs with 90 recommendations. And it is a challenging document for the member states, for civil society, and for the UN, because it offers, I think, a really excellent assessment of the current state of the world. But then the recommendations that it provides have to be within the framework of what the UN is capable to do. So you have these huge global challenges, which I think are very well described, and then 90 recommendations that seem maybe a challenge to overcome these huge issues that humanity is facing. So he did it, and we should commend him for it because it was a good effort. And now the member states are in a process where they are consulting about what to do with this report. The president of the General Assembly has called for 5 meetings of 10 hours each. 2 of them have already taken place. 3 of them are upcoming on different dimensions of our common agenda. So there's a lot happening at the UN around this. There are 3 global conferences called for: Transforming Education in 2022, the Summit of the Future in 2023, and a World Social Summit in 2025. There's so many things in there. But broadly, I'll just say he broke it down into 4 key pillars, I would say. One is a renewed social contract. So what is this contract that society and the people have? The second one is a focus on the future. What do we want to leave to rising generations and those yet to be born? The third is this protecting of the global commons and delivery of global public goods. So what is it that all of us value and all of us want to have delivered? And then the fourth is an upgraded UN. And these 4 things, each of them contain a number of recommendations. He's got this wonderful chart that he put together with the, again, 12 themes and how all these recommendations fall under there. But I think those 4 key pillars really can cover a lot of it. So I'll go very briefly, like 30 seconds each, into those pillars, and then I'll stop talking so we can get into the discussion. On a renewed social contract here, he's talking about social norms, how we finance things, civic engagement, intergenerational contracts, among other things. And again, the pillars aren't like, isolated. They're all sort of mutually overlapping. So he didn't just say these are the 4 independent things, but these are the 4 things that overlap each other. So social contract is kind of a term that we may be familiar with from philosophy, but the degree to which it finds expression, we shall see. And the member states have been asking a lot about what this is. Second one is a focus on the future. This has to do with the UN Youth Office, the Education Summit, Special Envoy for Future Generations, what he's calling also a Futures Lab. And he mentioned a repurposing of the Trusteeship Council to lead on strategic foresight. And that's not going to happen because we can't really reform the charter, because everybody gets mad whenever you talk about reforming the charter, even though probably it should be done. Okay, number 3, protecting and delivering global commons and global public goods. What are these things? These are, and I'm sorry to the note takers, but this part is less important anyway. So global commons and public goods are these things that all of us value and all of us treasure, but you end up running this tragedy of the commons. So all of us love fish, and we should all have fish in our seas. It's wonderful, but some people depend on fish for their livelihoods. And so to what degree should fishing be allowed, and who should do it, and who should oversee it? Same thing with transport, same thing with the UN itself, same thing with technology. So it has to do with vaccination, and again, international financial institutions, emergency platforms, a high-level advisory board. There's so many things on this global commons and public goods. And again, the member states keep asking, what do you mean by global commons and global public goods? These are not UN terms. Good luck to them. So the 4th item is an upgraded UN. And this is sort of the bare bones of what the UN does. So strategy and planning, research and knowledge, like the horizon scanning and capacity building, the normative dimension of the UN. So he makes a couple of recommendations, some of which he can do, the Secretary General can do without the advice and consent of the member states. Other things require member state approval. And so you have like a little bit of an argument here. Well, are you writing this because you want us to approve it? Or are you just going to do it because it's your mandate? And if we need to approve it, who's going to do it? What's the process for that? There's a lot of questions. All this said, it's an excellent opportunity for humanity to deliberate on the future of the UN. And it's a good thought piece from which we can jump off and create more energy, more dynamism, and enhance the conversation like we are doing today. And I will hopefully stop talking now and hand the floor over to Hannah to take us through the more interesting part of this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the overview of Our Common Agenda. I hope that everyone was able to clearly hear Dan. I was able to, so thank you very much for that. And I believe Rio has also put in the report, the Our Common Agenda report as well, in the chat for you to take a look at. So today, we'll be going over or asking some guiding questions, and the key word here I think is guiding. It's important to have in mind when thinking about your response or responses. What do you want to get out of this discussion? So feel free to ask your own questions to the group, for example. We only ask that you keep your responses and questions related to the Our Common Agenda, since that is the topic of the theme of this breakout room session. So without further ado, the first question that I would like to pose is more broad in the sense that we are trying to question the actual title of this breakout room session. So you'll notice the word breakthrough in the title, and the question is, what would represent a breakthrough for you in terms of global governance today? And I'll give people a couple seconds to think about that. And I can also put the question in the chat, actually, that might help. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I put in the wrong question. Ignore the first one. I don't think I can delete it. So some ideas, for example, might be, equity, more involvement of youth and women, thinking about the 12 commitments of the Our Common Agenda, which Dan really helpfully outlined before. Yes, sorry, ignoring again the first question that I put in the chat and looking at the second one, what would represent a breakthrough for you in terms of global governance today? And if you would like to respond, please feel free to put your hand up. Francis?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that I have found interesting is that the UN strongly advocates and champions for multilingualism, and that's been one of the things that the Secretary General has highlighted as an important process for multilateralism. But curiously, multilingualism was not present in the Our Common Agenda report. And so for me and for our organization, the Universal Esperanto Association, I think a major breakthrough would be recognizing the importance of multilingualism for equitable access and fostering dialogue. How can we make sure that the world's linguistic resources are used to maximize communication, shared problem solving, multilateral engagement, so that we can all understand and work together for solutions in our common agenda?
Definitely, I think that's incredibly important. And I also want to bring up and highlight as well that a lot of the recommendations in the Our Common Agenda are very much related to the SDGs. And like you said, multilingualism unfortunately wasn't in the Our Common Agenda. I think that we should be, especially since it really would help to achieve SDG 17, which is collaboration and partnerships. So yes, definitely. And I also want to say that if anyone would ever like to jump in and comment on someone's response, please feel free to also put your hand up. I see Daniel, your hand is up. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan Perel. I agree and concur with the positive and energetic presentation. Frank as well. I also am very, very interested in the importance of multi-language and culture issues. I think there's a lot of good and positive in OCA. I think there's also a very risky and dangerous aspect, which is a seemingly attempt to bring in corporations, large and small, including multinational corporations, Sort of, just about as on the same level and decision-making possibility as the countries themselves. And I think that would be an extremely dangerous step and would destroy the United Nations.
Thank you so much for your response, Daniel. Rex, I see you also put your hand up. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you also for this opportunity. It's very good organized. Thank you very much. As also hope and inspiration is part of the title to the common agenda, I'm very keen on what people have done since the UN NGO conference in Salt Lake City, where we have like a very interesting focus on SDG 11 about sustainable cities and communities. And I, for one, together with the group I'm in, Association for World Education, and I have been to the UN NGO conference in a decade for the last 10 years. So I'm just very keen on knowing about how far have members or representatives, NGOs, how have they reached to a question like, how far have your cities reached towards the Agenda 2030? I mean, in your own city, what is happening? Have you asked your city council about upgrading and moving into transition, and how is the world goal, the development goals as a whole? How has it been perceived in cities and community councils? I'm working on this, and I could tell you a lot about this. And we are trying to set up a database for the city I'm in. So we ask across sectors, schools, private companies, institutions, educational centers, and so on. We are asking them and putting it in a database. How far have you reached towards transition and all the green issues towards 2030? So I know this is very specific suggestion, but it represents from my own initiative and activities. I'm working full-time with this organization, Association for World Education. So this represents, in fact, a hope and also an inspiration to ask other cities where there are NGOs or UN activists, how is your situation in the city you're living in the local community? What are you doing? Okay.
Thank you so much, Rex. That's an incredibly important question, incredibly important conversation to have. I think one thing that a lot of people tend to do is think quite globally or quite broadly, whether global or on a national scale, and not necessarily in their own communities. And it's so important to kind of look, take a step back and do that. And hopefully, I hope that your project goes well, and I hope it does become successful, because it is really needed and necessary. And I hope that it doesn't just happen in your city, but everywhere in the world. And that we are able, people in each city are able to create those councils or communities that are able to talk to each other and look at how sustainable they are. I don't know, Dan and Nadine, if you would like to come in on that. I saw, Nadine, you commented in the chat. Feel free.
Sure. Well, I love everyone's responses. I think it adds so much dimension to our common agenda, and just really important to flag all these things. So thank you for your responses. I'd say on my end, when I think about a breakthrough, I think a lot about what our policies or our global governance is grounded in. And a lot of the time, we've been grounded in this ethic of consumption, and even our metrics of success are GDP, which measures this endless curve upward of how much did we consume or produce, and not so much focused on how well are we in mind, body, and spirit. How much do we care for one another? How much do we care for our earth? And so I would love to see a breakthrough in the very foundation on which all of our systems and structures are built. in really regrounding in compassion and regrounding in that intergenerational care. So it's great to be here today and to see so many generations coming together too to discuss the future that we'd hope to see.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Khushbu, I hope I pronounced your name right.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and such a great to be part of this conversation. And I totally agree with Nadina because the point that she has brought it into, it's just, in fact, I'm working into that space that, because when we talk about, I think the parameter, of course, till now, I think we're considering GDP. But since a lot of countries want to make a transition to a so-called green economy, then of course we need to bring that aspect of care. And that care could be for the people, for the environment, you know, for the whole, like we can look up into holistically. And that's what, at the same time, I just believe that what we really need into that aspect is the gender. Because the impact of the pandemic has different when it comes to, you know, when men and women. Even, for example, the gender inequality has, or if I talk about the pandemic, has a reverse impact on the mental well-being of the woman, because of course they are more into unpaid household care responsibilities, which are often neglected, not documented, especially in the space, like in India, for example, I've seen that they're more into inorganized sector, or you will find women in the informal sector. So in that scenario, I think their well-being has been suffered a lot. So and even the consumption patterns, if you see that the technology, the gadgets are generally made by men, but the usages or the consumption patterns are the choices are made by women. So these kind of discrepancies are there. So I just believe that if we have more diversity and inclusivity in our culture, I think that would be a breakthrough, because then we would be able to at least have a good equity, maybe not equality, but at least equity in that space that we are living in.
Yes, thank you so much, Khushbu. And I think you bring up a really good point there. You just briefly, very briefly mentioned it at the very end, difference between equity and equality. And I know this is kind of stepping away from our common agenda, but I just wanted to highlight that. It's not a question, just highlight that. And I'm looking at the time. I think we should move on to our next question, if that's all right with everyone. Our next question being, how can we ensure that youth and others who have historically been less heard, so not just youth, are meaningfully engaged in the ideation, development, and follow-on processes and outcomes of agenda setting and implementation processes? So again, I'll put the question in the chat for everyone to read if they'd like to. Just give me a few seconds. There we go. And essentially, this question is asking, how can youth and other groups who have been left out of very important conversations be more meaningfully engaged in deliberative and decision-making processes? And I think quite an important follow-on question is, how can we take forward these ideas both at the local level and at the global level? So sort of going a bit back to your response, Rex, as well. If I may, I'll give people a couple seconds to think about that question. But in the meantime, I do want to highlight, so a lot of my work is on youth, so quite biased in that sense. But in the Our Common Agenda, it advocates for the establishment of a UN Youth Office, a repurposed trusteeship council, as Dan outlined in the beginning, a declaration on future generations, and a special envoy for future generations to represent the interests of future generations. So the UN Youth Office, which is Article 47, for those who are interested in taking a read of the Our Common Agenda, it's Article 47. This UN Youth Office is established in the Secretariat, and it's meant to call for accountability and coordination on youth matters across the work of the UN. The repurposed trusteeship council is meant to give a voice to future generations. And Article 59, which is on the declaration on future generations, is meant to specify duties that member states would have to succeeding all future generations. And this would mean essentially that the interests of future generations would need to be considered with every decision that is made at the government level. So before I kind of move forward with this and kind of take everyone off on this youth path, I would like to kind of bring it back to our first question, to the fundamental base question, which I put in the chat, and ask if anyone would like to respond. And if not, I can keep going. But I would like to refrain from keep going, because I don't want this to be just about me and my interests in youth and the work I do. I want to hear from everyone. And I'd also like to remind everyone again that if you have a response, but you don't feel comfortable sharing that response with us in person or on video, please feel free to put it in the chat as well. I'm going to pronounce this name wrong, so forgive me, but Chukwuemeka, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Okay, thank you so much. I have been enjoying this session and I'm following. Thank you, Anna, for the opportunity to speak. So I just want to comment on the question about how can we ensure that youths can be actively involved in agenda setting and follow-up processes. I think one way we can have that sorted is I think the UN needs to have key representation more representation at the local levels, particularly in countries that have a lot of developing countries, for example, because I noticed that most of these opportunities are only visible at the global levels. There's really no or very few opportunities that come down to the very local levels. So I think the UN should begin to map out strategies to create new opportunities for young people at the very local levels to be able to get involved. And I think there should also be a direct. There should also be a kind of focus on policies. I think most of these experts should begin to think about how can we create policies that can actually engage young people at the local levels. So I think that's mostly the ideas I want to share on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You are very much right that we do need to look at the local level. Do you mean that? Do you mean the creation of jobs at the local level for youth?
Not really. I think there should be. Can you hear me? I think there should be more clusters. Most of these, there should be, like, for example, conferences happening at the local levels where young people can come together. There should be clusters. There should be youth groups. I think the UN has a role to play in bringing together these networks and all that, and engaging young people at the local levels. So it's not just basically about creating jobs. There really is less to do in that area. I think it's more about getting people to connect with each other and discuss opportunities, share ideas at the local levels. I think that's it.
Great, thank you so much for your response. Miguel, would you like to respond?
Well, but this is a commentary about something that Rex commented some time ago. So about the cities. So I just arrived to Jersey City, so I can't answer your question about this city of Jersey. But what I came from Spain and from a city in the east of Spain. Is called Elda, that is in Valencia community, and in that city there is a special program to take the SDG agenda for the city. So, and also there is a movement here in Spain between regions and cities So to have their own plan for 2030 agenda. But so my impression is that they highlighted especially environment, but they don't understand the 2030 agenda as a whole. This is a problem for me. This is an answer about your question, no? So I gave some one question about the future of our document, our common agenda. If this document will be real important for the transformation of United Nations. And my question now is about the importance that will have the civil society in this new United Nations that we are talking about, because now everybody knows, no, is based on the states. Possibly is for me, I'm convinced of that, you know. So it's a very important thing to highlight the regions in the world and representation from the regions. Well, in every step, in every place, in every organism inside the United Nations. But what will be the representation of civil society, the real representation, not a representation around the United Nations, but inside the United Nations of civil society? Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Miguel. I think that's a very important question. Rapporteurs, I'm not sure if we will be able to put that question in the chat as well, just so everyone can see it. That would be really great, but no worries if it takes a bit of time to do that. Francis.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to what Miguel said. I think this is what actually one of the greatest powers of civil society to contribute in this way. I think one of the things that the COVID-19 crisis has revealed in particular are some of the socio-political challenges around the work the member states can accomplish when it comes to shared problem solving. But when we think about the role that we play in civil society and how we can influence our own member state, I think that's a powerful contribution that we have to make, because that in turn can influence the multilateral process, right? So I think that's something where we can really think about the energy and the enthusiasm and also the power that we have as constituents of member states to influence the work that they do. And it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before also of the, acting local. I guess there's that old saying that's still relevant, right? Think global, act local. What can we do as individual members of civil society to influence our member states, which in turn will have this ripple effect on the global community.
Thank you, Francis. Rex?
Just very short comments, and I should not take all the time, but just to remind you all that there are several types, or I would say several organizations of city cooperation concerning the SDGs. And there is, apart from this City 40, as you might know, among big cities, but there's also a cooperation on a provincial city level. And there is also, there's a lot of things, but there's also an organization of local government. Politicians on local level are united in a certain organization somewhere in Barcelona, I think, but it's for all UN member states and local governments, local politicians, I mean, on governmental level. So there's a lot of activities going on. And the question is, how can we channel all these to the UN itself? There's a lot of activities going on. I just want to emphasize that. And also, we are going as a local group in Svendborg. We know that in the small country of Denmark, there's, as far as we know, there's no city activities going on in the same way as we are doing with making a database. So everyone across all sectors can check out how is the company from where you get the electricity or the water supply and so on, the garbage division, all these issues. How far are they as a private company or as a school or as an institution? How far are they, and in what and to what degree have they taken in the 17 development goals? So this is, I think, for me, it's of course a very important issue, but also we're going to show results on 7th of May, how far we have got in 1 year on this. It took us 1 year to organize it. And now we have been working for 1 year with the support from the city council. They have paid us money to establish the database, because no one else is doing. The city council is not doing it itself. They have a policy and we are checking that out. So in that sense, I'm very optimistic about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rex. Some really salient points have been made, and we have taken note of all of them. Thank you to the rapporteurs for that. And thank you, Miguel, Francis, and Rex, for your responses. And I'd kind of, if it's all right, I kind of like to take it a little bit back to the question, which is how we can ensure that youth and others who have historically been less heard can be meaningfully engaged in the processes and outcomes of agenda setting and implementation processes. So again, this doesn't necessarily mean processes within the UN, although that is definitely a question we should think about and consider, but just processes in general, whether that be at the local level or the global level, or in between national level. Yes, that is, any responses would be very welcome. And Rex, I'm not sure if that hand is an old hand or a new hand. Your hand is still raised. No, okay, I'll assume that's an old hand. Just kind of taking it back again to the question, and I can kind of, I don't want to talk too much. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but if no one has any responses, I can maybe give some people a little more time, and I would just splurge out ideas. So again, kind of going back again to the UN Youth Office and the Declaration on Future Generations. A question that I had is, given all of the structures that have been outlined in the Our Common Agenda, one question that has been coming up, especially since that Our Common Agenda has been published, is this enough? Are the youth structures outlined in the Our Common Agenda enough to fully ensure that youth are meaningfully and effectively included in decision-making processes? And a follow-up question from that, what else can we do to ensure that youth are meaningfully and effectively included in decision-making processes? So that's just a question, or two questions rather, that I have for the group, and open to responses. I have a couple of ideas, but I would like to hear from people first. Nadine?
Yeah, I can just speak to that really quickly. I think it's what's most critical to me with any kind of youth engagement is ensuring that youth are involved on the front end, when ideation is happening, when decisions are being made in the room where, you know, those pre-decision making conversations are happening. So, you know, equitable youth engagement isn't just pulling youth in at the end of the process and saying, look, okay, yay, we checked off the youth engagement checkbox, but really seeing value in intergenerational partnership, because there's so much that youth hope to offer, and we hope to learn. And I think that in these spaces, especially when we're working towards a collective future, it's really lovely to have that connection across generations. And there's so much that we can, again, offer and hope to learn. So just engagement from throughout the whole process rather than at just parts.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Dan?
Yeah, thanks so much. I don't mean to take the floor again. I know I spoke a lot at the beginning, but perhaps a little bit more of a subjective contribution based on the wonderful thoughts that have been shared thus far. So I'll do my best to try and tie a few things together. But Nadine, you spoke earlier about beyond GDP, and I will say that I was very pleasantly surprised that at the President of the General Assembly consultations on Monday of this week, Beyond GDP actually received quite a bit of consensus and support from many member states. I think it was really, really nice to hear, really refreshing that everybody wants something, but of course they want it to be just as easy as GDP. And unfortunately, the world is more complicated. I think that in like the bulk of my contribution is more about actually the first question and then things that derive from the first question, which sorry, I didn't jump in at that time, but it was about sort of what would represent a breakthrough. And to me, I have been thinking about Copernicus, which sounds totally irrelevant. But 500 years ago, day and night were still the same, the seasons were still the same, life on Earth was basically what it looks like today. And yet there was a huge shift in the conceptualization of where the planet was in respect of the sun and the solar system. He realized that it was not the center of everything, and the sun, in fact, the Earth, in fact, went around the sun. Now, 500 years later, we're using his wisdom. We've built tons of things based on that wisdom to go out into space and to orbit and to go in the L2 orbit with the James Webb Telescope. We have so many things that are just amazing based on this shift in understanding. Again, it didn't change night and day. It didn't change the seasons, but that change in understanding allowed humanity to take steps forward that Copernicus never could have thought of. I think we're in the similar moment of transition with global governance. And that is to say that the member state has been the center of global governance for about a century. Prior to that, it was like somewhat member states, it was city states, it was all of these things. But we now have to recognize and come to terms with this reality that we are one human family on one planet. And what this means is that we have to behave in kind of a different way, not day to day necessarily, but in how we conceive of the world. So policies taken with your national interest in mind, maybe they're okay, but maybe they have deleterious effects on your neighbors. And we can't have that anymore. The world is too united. And so a breakthrough to me would be just that shift in thinking, a Copernican moment, if you will, in the field of global governance, to recognize where we are placed vis-a-vis each other. And this gets to the issue of youth, indigenous peoples, women, all of these different constituencies, which are super important for their wisdom, for their history, for their contributions, but also not just unto themselves, but also for the breakthroughs that they provide for all of us. When youth participate fully, all of us benefit. When folks who are older participate fully, we all benefit. Persons with disabilities, the innovations that we've made for them have benefited all 8 billion of us, nearly 8 billion of us. And so this change in mindset from the constituency base, from the nation state base to the global, I think really would have profound knock-on impacts. And then the last thing I'll say, what does this mean for our common agenda? It means that we cannot turn to the UN and expect the UN to do it all for us. We have to be going to our local officials ourselves. We have to be in these spaces ourselves. The mountain is large, and there are many paths to that summit. And so all of us use the different advantages, the different wisdom that we have, and bring that to the summit and just see each other, not in competition, but in collaboration, following our own paths up there. And I think as we do it, we will get linguistic minorities engaged, we'll get youth engaged, we'll get everybody engaged as like not competing for a fixed pie, but as benefiting from the pie that we're all cooking together. Forgive the analogy, but I think that this moment to me is the breakthrough that we need. And I would love to hear us and others maybe speaking more along these lines in our rhetoric, rather than sort of mimicking what has come before in terms of, my group, my people, my country. Sorry, that was a diatribe, my apologies.
Thank you so much, Dan. I think round of applause, honestly. I think everyone here I can see a lot of people smiling and nodding and basically in agreement with you. And I definitely am. And it's very hard to follow up on that now. But essentially, I think you have essentially spoken on what it is that we need to take away out of this session and what we need to think about moving forward. It's very easy to forget that we need to be in collaboration and in partnership with one another. especially with everything that's been going on in the world. We really need to rely on each other more than ever, and we really do need again that equity, as Khushbu was saying as well. So I think we have 7 minutes now, and I would like to take those 7 minutes to kind of follow up on what you have been saying, Dan, and a lot of people have been getting at as well. And that is, what future opportunities would you like to see, whether that be the UN, DGC, the Global Society, create in order to advance these perspectives? So some examples can be networking, collaborating on projects, future webinars, possibly a webinar on the Our Common Agenda, or a webinar specifically focused on sustainable cities. We've had a lot of conversation around that today, and it definitely can constitute or make up an entire webinar on its own, definitely. So again, I can put that question in the chat for everyone to, for everyone's convenience. Let's see, here we go. And if anyone has any ideas regarding what you would like to see following on from this session, this event today, please feel free to write it in the chat or raise your hand, and we would love to hear from you. Something, well, I'll give some people some time to think about it. Oh, Miguel, okay, go ahead.
So answering your question about Zoom meetings and so on. So I think it's very important to continue with this, talking about the whole common agenda altogether, no, and thinking on the world. But well, cities are very important, but regions are more important. So more and more important. So there are 3 levels. No, there are 3 levels. I want to include another one because it's more and more important also. No, this is a regional level. But so centering in our common agenda for everybody in the world, so every state in the world. So cities, very good, and also regions, because regions are very active also.
Thank you so much, Miguel, for your response. I completely agree that regions as well are very important. And, you know, as we grow, as society grows, we may be adding on to those layers. So while I'll give everyone a couple seconds, some time to think about their response to the question that I put in the chat. But in the meantime, and kind of following on actually from what you were saying, Miguel, on a future session, whether that be a webinar or something else, a workshop on the Our Common Agenda, I think would be very beneficial. And then possibly going into the different commitments in the Our Common Agenda as well. I know that there are consultations happening right now, informal consultations organized by the President of the General Assembly that are talking about giving civil society or NGOs a chance to talk about the Our Common Agenda, and member states as well to pose questions and concerns, if any, or to give support. So I would definitely recommend everyone take a look at that if they haven't already or if they're unaware. Francis?
If she got this.
Oh, yes, thank you. I would love to see a more concerted and perhaps targeted relationship and engagement with the NGOs, because it seems this is a wonderful conversation and I love the brainstorming that we've done and sharing ideas. But it would be great if the DGC and perhaps other civil society groups, if we were to kind of bring folks together around thematic areas of expertise, and in perhaps in interdisciplinary ways. But, you know, I think there are ways that we all have to contribute based on the areas that we work in specifically to have a deeper level of engagement. So it would be great if we had perhaps thematic organization panels where we could target specific areas and brainstorm more deeply ways that we can be involved in advance change.
No, I think that is a very good idea. And it will follow on very nicely from this conversation that we are currently having as well, kind of having this broader conversation and then going into more specific ones. Chukwemeka, I'm so sorry. Please, could you please tell me how to pronounce your name?
Okay, my name is Munas Chukwemeka. So you're actually right. Yeah. Can you hear
That's
me?
great. Thank you. You have the floor.
Okay. Yeah. So I just have one recommendation about future opportunities that I would like to see. I would like to see the UN set up a kind of digital learning platform where young people and young professionals and CSO leaders at local levels can learn about how to structure their organizations and how to be more adapted to the UN policy processes. So like UN should look at creating a kind of digital platform. I know I saw something like that. The UNESCO has something like that. And also a case in mind also the yearly learning platform. I think the UN needs to have such kind of database or kind of platform that leverages on the experiences and knowledge of the experts within the network of the UN, and in creating that kind of learning platform. So I think that's just my recommendation for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chukwemeka. Unisa?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Junisa Kalon from Freetown, Sierra Leone. Thank you for the presentations. I've heard a lot and I've learned a lot. Basically, my recommendation here or my submission will be more or less in the direction of taking action, seeing how best can we popularize the common agenda. And one of those ventures which I with us all, I believe, those of us within the civil society space, we can see how we can decentralize this through establishment of UN clubs, which could be an active platform for high school kids as well as university graduates and undergraduates to be part of their common agenda and the various initiatives that are depicted within the documents, especially with clusters addressing the concerns and the challenges of youth. So I believe that is something we can also look at in effectively decentralizing this information, because with the youths and the younger generation coming up, I believe it's our responsibility to see how we take up the mantle of leadership through enacting some of these platforms in educational and learning institutions at the various categories which kids find themselves from high school to university, for them to be familiarized with the SDGs itself and what the common agenda is all about, and how can they also be the change we are all craving for to see. I believe that's my submission for now.
Thank you so much, Unisa. I'm very aware that we have about 20 seconds left of this breakout room before it closes. So I'd just like to say a very, very quick thank you to everyone for your responses. Anyone who's written in the chat, we have recorded that, or the rapporteurs have recorded it. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to the rapporteurs, a big thank you to all of you for participating and for attending today, and a very big thank you to Nadine